everything that she was able to accomplish is a legacy worthy of her mother, Sayyida Fatima. Because I think regardless of what label you attribute to yourself, whether you call yourself a Shia, whether you call yourself a Sunni, if you believe that the Quran is the word of God, you can historically and tactically tie your Muslim identity back to the courage and the bravery of Sayyida Zainab when she fought to protect that word. You know, in our Masa'ib, we've heard it. There's that when Sayyida Zainab returned back to Medina and she went to her mother's grave, she couldn't complete the last few, I apologize. It's a very sad story, a little emotional, but she couldn't complete the last few steps on her feet. She had to complete it on her hands and her knees. And we have to really give pause and think about this for a little bit, because it was only here with her mother, with her mom, she was able to soften, and she didn't have to fight anymore. And she could grieve, because your mother is your home, and home is safety, and you can be vulnerable. And when we juxtapose this memory with the reality that this is ultimately what the tyrannical state wanted from her, and she would not give it to them. She only showed vulnerability and with her mom. They wanted to humiliate her. They wanted to subjugate her. They wanted to break her. But I think they forgot who her parents were. They forgot what blood was running in her veins, because the blood of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam will not be subjugated. The daughter of Ali will not be humiliated. And the daughter of Fatima cannot be broken. And they forgot that. And she showed them. So in honor of this, both of these auspicious ladies, I would like to invite Brother Shajahat Hussain to the mic for a recitation in Urdu in their honor. Is he here? Okay.
बारे दिगर सलवात क्या बताऊं मकाम ज़ैनब का क्या बताऊं मकाम ज़ैनब का क्या बताऊं मकाम ज़ैनब का इसमें आज़म है नाम ज़ैनब का इसमें आज़म और मैं तो क्या खुद कसीदा पढ़ते हैं मैं तो क्या खुद कसीदा पढ़ते हैं मेरे बारा इमाम ज़ैनब का मेरे बारा और बन गया खुद अलम सा कागज़ पे گیا خود علوں سا کاغذ پر لکھ رہا تھا میں نام زینب کا لکھ رہا تھا. ایک اور سواد بھیج دیں محمد وال محمد کو. تیرے صدقے میں زہرا ہو رہا ہے تیرے صدقے میں زہرا ہو رہا ہے خدا کو جو بھی سجدہ ہو رہا ہے تیرے صدقے میں زہرا ہو رہا ہے اور تیری چادر کے سائے میں بی بی تیری چادر کے سائے میں بی بی خدا والوں کا جلسہ ہو رہا ہے تیرے صدقے میں زہرا ہو رہا ہے. اے مفتی روک لے سلمان کو جا اے مفتی روک لے سلمان کو جا در زہرا پہ سجدہ ہو رہا ہے تیرے صدقے میں زہرا ہو رہا ہے. ایک سوال بھیج دیں محمد وال محمد پر.
Brother Shujat, thank you. That was so beautiful. And I think it's a good, for those of us who could understand it, it's a good reminder of how these two auspicious women and how their personalities and their legacies are really so reflective of each other. The organizers of today's program thought that the proximity of Lady Fatima's birth anniversary would actually be a good opportunity to announce the launch of a very important project, the Nothing But Beauty Project. The Nothing But Beauty Project, under the auspices of the Ummah organization, but in collaboration with the preeminent scholars on this subject, is a four-faceted project with the goal of ensuring the long-term sanctity and dignity and preservation of Lady Zainab's legacy through the preservation and ensuring the dignity of the shrine in Damascus. So I will be asking Dr. Azmat Hussain, President of Ummah, to give you more specificity on the four facets, but there's just one that I wanted to highlight now because it's such an individual, personal thing for any follower of the Ahlul Bayt who has had a yearning for many years now. And this first initiative is to ultimately establish a legal path, a legal reopening of ziyarat to Sham with a official visa category. So, you know, in the crowd here, actually, is Brother Wael Al-Zayat. Would you please just raise your hand? Brother Wael has been facilitating this one facet of the project so wonderfully. Brother Wael is actually the CEO of the Engage organization, which is a civic engagement organization for Muslims. But he is also a former State Department official with and has worked on State Department work in Syria for many years. So whether it's been facilitating meetings or whether it's been working with on-the-ground logistics, Brother Wael has passionately put in time and energy and his skills into this reopening. And I really just wanted to highlight something, which is that Brother Wael is a really wonderful representation of his people, of the Syrian people, who have simply wanted a life free of fear and a life of where they have their own agency and where they can rise above sectarianism. Because I would like to highlight, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, brother, but brother is not Shia. He does identify as Sunni, and here he is advocating for any devotee of the Ahlul Bayt, regardless of what they call themselves, to visit the shrine of Sayyida Zainab. So please do recite a salawat for Brother Wael and his wonderful family. All right. Next, I would like to introduce someone who actually doesn't need an introduction. He is a wonderful member of the community, a familiar face. But Dr. Hassan Abbas is an expert on South Asian and Middle Eastern studies, on counterterrorism and governance and international security. And he's published a book on Imam Ali by Yale Press, and that's actually here, if you can see on my left here. I don't know if the ladies can see it, but there's a table here. And there's a forthcoming book on Sayyida Fatima Zahra, also being published by Yale Press. So, Dr. Abbas, if you will please take the mic. No worries, I think it works.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It's a truly a great honor and a pleasure to be here to pay tribute to Sayyidatun Nisa'il Alameen, Bibi Fatima Zahra, Salamullah Alaiha. I'm not very sure whether we as humans are really capable of offering a tribute to her, given her status, given her contribution, given her centrality to the faith of Islam, but I'll make an attempt. And I'll start with some famous verses in Persian language from Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, who, when he was asked, how would you compare and how would you define and how would you introduce Sayyidat Fatima Zahra? And he said, and he was asked to compare her with Bibi Maryam, who of course is another of the most important personalities of the human race. And Iqbal had said, Maryam az yak nisbat Isa aziz, az se nisbat Hazrat Zahra aziz. There are three reasons why Fatima is supreme. And there's one reason for Maryam, of course, being the mother of Jesus, but he said, Noor Chashme Rahmatul Lil Alameen, Imam Awwaliyon Akhirin. Second reason, Banwe Tajdare Halata, Murtaza, Mushkil Kusha, Shere Khuda. And then he said the third reason of her superiority is Madare a Markaze Parkare Ishq, Madare a Karma Salare Ishq. These are the three criterion for Fatima to be superior to anyone else. And while I have started this, I'll, in honor of what was just mentioned of our brother Wael, so in his honor, I'll recite hadith. Many people mention, especially in the Shia, the Shia tradition or tradition of Imam Jafar Sadiq alayhi salam, it is said that she was, Sayyida was a Sayyidatun Nisa'il Alameen. She was the leader of women in heaven. That's all we know, right? That's what is often mentioned. She is the leader of all women, which is Asiya and Maryam, everyone. The Sunni hadith is actually, on this subject, is actually more powerful. And if I may say, the Sunni brothers in faith, let me say that, are a step ahead of the Shia tradition. You know what the Sunni hadith says in Muslim and Bukhari? They said Fatima is the leader of all people in heaven, men and women. Now, if you have not heard it, this being a Shia, this is this early warning and alert for you. Is it that so many a times we are boxed in our narratives, so entrenched in our narratives that we even don't bother to appreciate what might be more powerful than what you think? That's why I wanted to mention this in the Sunni hadith. One other, while I'm on that, one other way to pay tribute, because in the short time there's no way I cannot give you a lecture on philosophy or the history. Everything is in your hearts. But I found some verses from another Sunni poet, which I think is unmatched. And I say this as a lover of Ahlul Bayt. I have tried to find something in poetry more powerful than this on Sayyida. I couldn't. And you'll see as soon as I recite, I'll try to translate a little bit for those who doesn't know Urdu. This is by, and this is titled as Hal Jazaul Ihsan Illa Al Ihsan, which I'll come to. Why Iftikhar Arif, when introducing Sayyida Fatima, why he gave the title of his tribute to Sayyida as Hal Jazaul Ihsan Illa Al Ihsan. Because there is a favor from God, and are we capable of responding to that favor? But I'll come to that. He said, Ajab ek silsila hai. Ajab ek silsila hai, Khatija, Fatima, Zainab. Wafa ke baab mein, sidko safa ke baab mein, sabro raza ke baab mein, kaisa munawwar rasta hai. Khatija, Fatima, Zainab. Talue harfe ikra se, तलुए हरफ़े इकरा से सदाए इस्तगासा तक हिरा से करबला तक मशीयत ने जो एक हरफ़े जली खींचा हुआ है, इसी का नूर है जो दिल बे मंजिल हर तरफ फैला हुआ है। रिसालत की गवाही हो, रिसालत की गवाही हो, विलायत की गवाही हो, इमामत की गवाही हो, जो ये कह दे वही मीज़ान हक में मुस्तनद पाया गया है। खदीजा, फातिमा, ज़ैनब गवाही में तसलसल, और फिर ऐसा तसलसल, आप खुद अपनी जगह एक मुजज़ा है। खदीजा और अबू तालिब ने जिस मंजिल से नामूसे रिसालत की हिफाजत की, ये सारा मुजज़ा इसी की जज़ा है। ये सारा मुजज़ा इसी की जज़ा है। ये जो हम आज दुनिया में पहचाने गए हैं, लायके इकराम गर्दाने गए हैं, इन्हीं के दर का सदका है, इन्हीं की सब अता है। खदीजा, फातिमा, ज़ैनब अजब एक सिलसिला है। वफ़ा के बाब में, सिद्क़ व सफ़ा के बाब में, सब्र व रज़ा के बाब में कैसा मुनव्वर रास्ता है। सलावत पढ़ें। I'm sure with the names, those who don't know Urdu, they would still get all the main themes from this. So I'll not go into translation, but let me make 3 or 4 major points for this August gathering. And first and foremost, I would say, I'll start with the point why Iftikhar Arif framed it as Hal Jazaul Ihsan Illa Al Ihsan. When we appreciate the greatness of the personalities, this is not just to inspire us. There's far more deeper meaning. If there was no far deeper meaning, we would never have read Siratullah Zina Anamta Alayhim. God, take us to the path of those on which you have done blessings. There is more expectation from us than the mere rhetoric or the mere oratory or the mere narration of facts in honor of these great personalities. The test is, are we capable of following in the path of these people or not? And what are the primary characteristics of this pathway? Unless we are clear on that, the mere rhetoric is not going to take us very far. I'll also mention, there could have been many references. I can start with Surah Al-Kawthar, to Surah Inna Anzalna, to Mubahila, to Ayat Tathir. Quran is full of praise for Sayyida. And actually, just a short anecdote I'll mention. When I had published the book on Imam Ali alayhi salam, by the way, this is as a gift. This is a gift for, especially the first priority is for the Sunni brothers and sisters. If you are Sunni, please take 2 copies. One for a gift. Then for women, it should have been on this side because I wanted it for women, and then for young people if there are any left. But what I wanted to mention this again from a famous quote. I'll not mention those great traits that I've mentioned. When I was talking to my publisher, and in the academic world, the way you publish it, unlike a trade publishing, you really have to convince at times non-Muslims, leading scholars, of why a book or a biography of a certain personality is important. And they challenged me when I wrote after this book, there was a discussion, okay, write a biography of Sayyida Fatima, and when I wrote the proposal, a leading scholar who is unnamed, because that's how peer review happened, they responded back and said, well, the challenge with the biography of Sayyida Fatima is that most of her praise was documented 400, 500 years after the Prophet. So these are new hadith, at times pitched by and concocted by, at that time, the Shia Muslims. So there is no evidence on the superiority of Fatima. So my editor said, well, this is a challenge. This is what the peer reviewer said, unless you are able to convince the board in the opposite direction. And I said, I don't have to. And they said, you have 1 month to respond in writing. I said, I don't need a 1 month. I need 1 hour to respond to this. I said, whosoever is saying it took 500 years has not read Quran. They have not read Inna Atainaka Al-Kawthar. They have not read Surah Mubahila. Is there anyone who ever challenged that when Prophet with his family walked in front of the Christians and he said there was one woman who was in center? Is there anyone who has challenged about what we read about the Hadith-e-Kisa? She is the center. See, the centrality of religious discourse comes from Fatima. And Surah Halata and Surah Al-Insan, has anyone claimed that when it was mentioned by God that there were 3 days when one day a prisoner comes in, one day a poor person comes in, every day someone gives all the food and all what they had to the other? Has any historian, any Mufassir Quran or interpreter ever said about a woman other than Fatima? So I said to them, look, the evidence is in Quran. It's not 500 years later. And luckily, they agreed and they asked for the verses and we went on. One verse that I want to just mention for her status, that should be good enough. That again is from Jalaluddin Suyuti, the most prominent or one of the most prominent Sunni interpreters of Quran. His famous work is called Durr-e Mansur, if I'm correct. The event is the famous verse of Surah Nur for the children, so that they remember. There's this verse in Surah Nur, which is verse number 34. This will be the only one that I would mention just to make my point. I'll just give a translation of the verse for the benefit. It starts with, of course, famously, Allahu nur samawati wal arz misl nurihi. You know the famous verse. It says, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. I want you to focus on the translation. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. His light is like a niche in which there is a lamp. The lamp is in a crystal. The crystal is like a shining star lit from the oil of blessed olive tree, located neither of the east nor of the west, whose oil would almost glow even without being touched by fire. Light upon night, light upon light. Allah guides whoever He wills His light, and Allah sets forth parables for humanity, for Allah has perfect knowledge of all things. When the Prophet recited this, because every day or the other, the Prophet, peace be upon him, was always mentioning the Quranic verses and then he would interpret. When he was making, I'm quoting it from Jalaluddin Suyuti from Durr-e Mansur. He says, when the Prophet narrated this in front of the audience, somebody stood up and said, so what is this Nur ala Nur? What is this Nur, the light upon light? Prophet said, Well, this is about the houses of prophets. That's the reference. Then Hazrat Abu Bakr, who later became first caliph, stood up and said to the Prophet a counter question or a further question for elaboration. He wanted more knowledge on this. He said, so Prophet, you have just said that this verse is about houses of the Prophet. The only Prophet in front of us is the final Prophet, you. But there's a house next to you. This is, I'm quoting word by word from Durre Mansoor. He said, there's a house next to it, Fatima's house. Is this house also part of those houses which are mentioned in this Quran? You know what Prophet said? Prophet said, this is one of the greatest of those houses. Actually, let me correct. He even didn't say one of the, he said it is the greatest of those houses. And this is reference, our sources, Hazrat Abu Bakr, and our sources, Jalaluddin Suyuti. So there has to be no doubt in anyone's mind about the status. Two more references, and then there are many guests and speakers, so I'll not take a lot of your time, but two references which I was reading for inspiration. Which is, one was by Ayatollah Behjat, you know, the very famous Arif. One of his books, it's recently published by Al-Buraq. Actually, I know that Azmat Hussein's father, they have supported publication of that work. It is mentioned therein. Have you read Azmat, the whole book? Good. So I know you have. So it is mentioned therein that Ayatollah Behjat quoted. He said that this was asked by Sheikh Al-Qummi, whose book Mafatil Janan is in almost every Shia house. Other than Quran and Hadith books, that is almost ever present. They said, whether it was in a dream or real, he was asked, Sheikh Qummi was asked, this is a great honor. There are thousands and hundreds of thousands of books. Your book is in every house of the lover of Ahlul Bayt. Can you share what had you done? Was there any special prayer? Was there something unique you did? Because your book got a status which no other book got. He said, his response was, yes, I had done a humble gesture. When I published the book, I dedicated its benefits and blessing to Sayyida Fatima to Zahra. He said, that is the reason. And that was the response of God. In the same vein, there's another very famous incident and a book I really want to appreciate. I'm an academic. I'm sorry, I'll have to push some books and ideas that I want you to read, which is the most famous contemporary modern-day Islamic scholar, Sayyid Hussain Tabatabai. I highly encourage you to read his works. His tafsir is the most famous tafsir, which is called Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. He has not mentioned hadith. He has proved everything from Quran. Those of you who have listened to the Pakistani great scholar, God bless his soul, Talib al-Jawhari, you remember, he would always recite a Quranic verse, then would build his argument based on another Quranic verse. He was always borrowing from Tafsir al-Mizan, from Hussain Tabatabai. So Tabatabai was asked the same question. He was said, this your tafsir has become the predominant central tafsir. Can you share what happened? What was the inspiration? And he narrates a story. And because he's contemporary, this story is, in his words is also available to the best of my knowledge. But because he passed away like 10 or 15, 20 years ago. He mentioned that when I was growing up, and when my father and teacher had tasked me that you have to learn about Islamic teachings, because they were a family of religious scholars. And he said, I didn't have much interest. And I would every day sit in front of my teacher, and I couldn't get through to the intricacies and the dynamics of the whole argument. And he said to a point that my teacher came one day and said, well, I am indebted to your father, otherwise you are not worth a person that I spend time on. And I am wasting my time with you. He said, I really got disappointed. And I said, God, what have I done? I mean, please help me to understand some of what he's teaching me and create a deep interest in it so that I live up to the expectations of my family, teachers, and others. He said, I really prayed that night very hard. He said, in my dream, I saw something. He said, in my dream, this is well-recorded story. He said, in my dream, I heard somebody came to me, hugged me hard and said, ask for the intercession of Sayyidatul Fatima Zahra. He said, in that dream, I did that. And he said, in that dream, I was told, one special condition, there's a special condition. Now, from now onwards, you'll have a very special knowledge. And everything will flow in your heart and from your heart. But there's one condition. You should never be arrogant because of what you know. Never expose what you know. He said, next day onwards, my teacher would come, and he said, I did my intercession with Fatima Zahra. He said, from next day onwards, my teacher would come and I would know the whole lesson ahead of the time. He said, that's what inspired me to write the Tafsir al-Mizan, because I got direct guidance through that. The point that I'm making from this is, so often in the Ahl-e tradition or a Jafri tradition, we say, Ya Ali Madad. Often say, Ya Ali Madad, Bihaqqi Allah Samad, Ya Ali Madad. There's so many prayers, Nade Ali. The mystics argue that the Ya Ali Madad or the intercession in the name of God through Ali is one thing, but the more exclusive and even more powerful circle is that of Ya Fatima Madad. I'm just sharing it because this is a day when we really acknowledge and appreciate the wisdom. 3 points and then I'll beg leave. So why is it good enough just to believe and narrate these things, or there is something more to it? Is there something we owe back? And I would say yes. What we owe back is internalizing the main characteristics. And if I had to do the most famous one that I would start with is selflessness. And this is not mere an English word. This is, we know from the tradition of Hazrat Hassan alayhi salam, say salawat. He said when he was a child, he said, I sat with my mother one day and I would know every day my mother is praying the whole night. And he said, one day I really wanted to know, what is she praying? He was small and young, of course. He said, one day I stayed up the whole night. And what I learned was that she was praying praying names of everyone in my neighborhood, in my extended family, even the people who we had some challenges and issues with. He said, next morning I asked my mother, so tonight I was up last night and I heard every prayer, but I have a question. And my question is, you prayed for everyone except yourself. You prayed for everyone in the neighborhood, in our extended family, in the city. And Sayyida said the most famous statement. She said, pray for others, give others before you think of yourself. That is the certain and the first criterion. And I would argue that's why the centrality, and let me say, at times I feel the foundation of religious discourse is built around Fatima. Otherwise, why would Prophet stand up? Why would Prophet call her his mother in terms of her role and character? The second, other than the selflessness, the second major thing we always have to remember, Fatima, Ali, Hassan, Hussain, they're all important because they taught us how to follow and love the Prophet. The most central reality is Prophet, never forget that. The family members, there were many other family members also. These family members became central foundation of the discourse because they taught us how to love the Prophet and how to be loyal. Never forget that after selflessness, if there's one word I want you to remember, is loyalty. Loyalty not to the person only, loyalty to the cause, because they were not interested in thinking of themselves and projecting themselves as the big people who you'll follow. Unless what you follow takes you to the path of spirituality and to the path of God. Unless you are clear about this chain and you cut this chain and stop at the point of oration, or belief that just by mere narrating this is good enough. That was not the purpose of religious discourse nor spirituality. Always remember this. And my last point is, always remember the element of sacrifice. She could have opted for convenience. She could have opted for comfort. The most famous case of Tasbih Fatima to Zahra, many people wrongly attribute thinking he went asking for some help at home. And there's a famous scholar who said, the response that came in the shape of Tasbih Fatima to Zahra from the Prophet tells us what the question was. The question was not of help. The question was that every day from this house, there were so many people who were being fed. There was constant cooking. There was constant other things. And Sayyida was always worried, I am not getting enough time to pray. That was her challenge. Her challenge was not that there is a lot of work, and because of that work, I need help. That's how many people mention it. No, she was saying, I'm not finding enough time. And that's why what came from God was, no, we'll tell you a prayer which is heavier than many of the long prayers. Because it is impossible that the response comes which is not directly relevant to the ask. The ask was, I need to pray to God. And response comes like that. So that's all that I had to share with you as my very, very humble tribute. And I'll end with one special request, one very short anecdote. When I was doing this, I finished my research, or I was in the process of research for the book on Sayyida Fatima to Zahra. And this I'm mentioning it as an out-of-box idea. Might be a little provocative, but that's the role of a teacher, to provoke you, to say something controversial, but I want you to think about. When I read all the hadiths, and I went to Ayatollah Sayyid Saidul Hakim, the great marja, who passed away 2 years ago, I went to him and I said, Sayyid, now that I'm working on the book on Sayyida Fatima Zahra, I have come to a very strange conclusion. But I cannot dare say it because it is very unconventional. He said, no, ask, that's why we are the scholars. I said to him that I'm coming to the impression, after reading the hadith and reading the discourse, that Sayyida Fatima was at least, watch my words, at least equal to Ali. Maybe, and I didn't say it what I wanted to say, maybe. He kept quiet. He said, no, you can't say that. Ali was the most prominent one, because when Ali was Imam, he was Sayyida's Imam as well, so he's Afsal to Ali. I said, fine, but I had to ask you this question because I am seeing so many sources. And it is is it male chauvinism? Is it something else that is at play? All the tafsir are written by men. All the hadiths are quoted by men. Every major speaker is a man. So there's an inherent bias against the women's status. Then he stopped me. I was about to leave, and he said, no, I'll say one more thing to you, and I'm a marja. All I can say is this word. He said, now I'm reminded of the hadith when Prophet had said, if there was no Ali, there would have been no equal of Fatima. So you're right. At least we know from Prophet that she was equal. He said, the rest I leave it to you, but be careful. I said, I'll be careful. But that's what I'm feeling. So my last point to you to think about is, we have to think beyond gender, beyond sectarianism. If Quran, according to Sunni Hadith, is saying she is the leader of all people in heaven, of course, Hassan and Hussein are his sons. She owns all that discourse. With that, I would beg leave and special request for prayer that I complete the book, and that gets as well as was this book. I need your prayers for my research work on the book on Sayyida Fatima Zahra. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Abbas. That was such a wonderful speech. There was so much wisdom in there. The one thing that resonates with me is you asked us a question, are we capable of following on the path of these personalities? And if we just remind us of this question on a daily basis, I think we can all improve and make this world a better place. So next, I would like to introduce Dr. Noor Zadi. She is a professor of Middle Eastern and South Asian Studies with a specialization in the history of gender, Shiism, and sectarianism. She's actually about to publish a book titled Daughters of Ali, Traces of Zainab. And actually, I will be asking Dr. Zaidi to introduce our guest of honor, who is someone that she knows well. She's done a lot of research with the Matawali, the caretaker, the trustee of Lady Zainab's shrine, when she's done.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. First, I just wanted to start out by wishing congratulations to all of you on this auspicious occasion, the birth of Bibi Sayyida Fatima bint Muhammad alayhi salam, because we know from our history that this was one of the most joyous days in our Prophet's life, in our beloved Prophet's life. And I think it's so fitting, in fact, that we are gathered here. I should say that almost a year ago, Dr. Hassan Abbas and I did an event for his book on Imam Ali for Muslim Heritage Month. And now we are gathered together to speak about Bibi Fatima and Bibi Zainab. So I look forward to continuing to work through all of the auspicious personalities in Shia Islam, and we'll discuss who we're going to do next. But it is fitting, I think, as Rida mentioned, that we are gathered here today on the Viladat of Bibi Sayyida, Fatima bint Muhammad, to be talking about her daughter as well. Because it is in some ways so difficult to talk about mother without daughter. And I was thinking about the connection between the two of them, and I was reminded today of a book that is written actually by a famous Egyptian historian, a woman named Aisha Abdelrahman bint al-Shati. So she's one of the most famous Arab writers of the 20th century. And Aisha Abdelrahman was a PhD, she was a professor of literature. She was also trained by sheikhs at Al-Azhar University. So she's renowned for her Islamic knowledge, and she is also known as one of the first modern women to complete a full tafsir of the Quran. She's incredibly renowned, and as Dr. Hassan Abbas mentioned, our task is to mention books and give you references. So Aisha Abdelrahman is also quite famous because she published a series of biographies of famous Muslim women who deserved a stature to be recognized and spoken about in early Islam. And in that series, she published a biography of Bibi Zainab. And that book was known, and the title of the book was Batalat Karbala, Zainab bint al-Zahra. And of course, that translates to the heroine of Karbala, the daughter of Fatima. And I think that's particularly beautiful to remember on a day like today, because of course, we often refer to her as Zainab bint Ali, and she is, of course, the adornment of her father. That is what Zainab means, right? Zainab, the adornment of her father. But in this moment, I think it's quite beautiful to remember that she is the daughter of Fatima and all of that she inherited. And so it's quite beautiful to think of a woman, Aisha Abdelrahman, an Egyptian woman, writing this biography of this revered figure and referring to her as the daughter of her mother. So I hope that you all have an opportunity to read that book, but I also think it's particularly poignant to think about these two women together, because I was kind of touched that Rida got a little bit emotional talking about Bibi Zainab's return to her mother's grave. In some ways, being Shia is to remember grief and joy sometimes at the same time, all at once. And in some ways, we can't talk about Bibi Fatima without remembering that for many of us, we realize that her grave has very little to mark it. And it's a source of tremendous, I think, grief for us, and for women especially, who are not really able to access the grave of Bibi Fatima and pay it the kind of respect that we would love to do. It is fitting that we are here also to talk about the grave and the shrine of Sayyida Zainab bint Ali alayhi salam, and think about what does it mean for us to see this shrine and this grave not as a space of division, but as an example of collective humanity. And I mentioned Aisha Abdelrahman because, of course, she is just one example of a very, very long history, a tradition of people of all sects and of all backgrounds who have spoken about the greatness of Zainab bint Ali. So from Al-Jawzi, who is a famous 12th century Hanbali scholar from Baghdad, to Jalaluddin al-Suyuti, who Dr. Hassan Abbas knows well, a famous sheikh from Egypt, an Egyptian sheikh from Egypt. Words of praise of Zainab bint Ali have never been restricted to one time or one kind of people or one sect. And I think that, the story of Aisha Abdul Rahman's biography of Bibi Zainab is actually quite interesting, because when she published the first edition in 1952, within days, so this book was published, Batalat Karbala, in 1952, and within days, every copy in Egypt sold out in the first edition. And then it was published throughout the Arab world, and that book sold out rapidly. And she writes, actually, that it was one of the best-selling books in the Arab world in the 20th century, and it's not something that we know about, right? We are not told that one of the best-selling books was written by a woman about Zainab bint Ali, but it was the case. And when she reprinted it, that book continued to sell, and it continues to sell to today. And I think that tells you about the broad appeal of Bibi Zainab, right? But I also think that it tells you that the way we speak about her, if we speak about her in the way that she deserves to be spoken about, we can spread her message and reach beyond just a narrow frame of reference. Zainab bint Ali was a woman who was known, of course, as alama ghair mu'allam, right? A woman who has knowledge without being taught. And yet herself, she did teach. She taught women, right? She taught the women of Medina. And I must say that for me as a professor, that embrace of knowledge and teaching and learning is such an exceptional part of Zainab bint Ali's personality. She was raised in the holiest of households, the daughter of Muhammad and Fatima, Khadija and Ali. And yet she was tested and sacrificed in a way that perhaps only the closest to Allah are ever truly tested. She was a woman who endured when even endurance was tired, and she was a woman that was put in chains but was never broken and never bowed. And she is a woman who ensured for us that hope was not lost on the plains of Karbala, but that it is renewed every year and in every place across the globe, right? It is her voice and her message and her body that endured and left that lesson and legacy with us. And she is a woman whose voice, speaking against injustice and tyranny, is never more, I think, relevant than it is today, right? The way she spoke up against injustice, the way she spoke up against tyranny reminds us in this time and in this place how valuable her lesson is. And when I say that Sayyida Zainab resonates with people far and wide, I must say I say it from experience. So, for most of my career, I've not had the benefit of speaking in front of an audience that already loves Bibi Zainab and understands her story and knows her value to Islam. Most of my time is spent, as a professor at an American university teaching students who are not Muslim, let alone Shia. And when we attend academic conferences and talks, I'm not speaking to an audience that is already has the benefit of growing up with the story of Bibi Zainab, right? And I thank my parents, of course, and I think we all thank our parents every day that we were raised with this knowledge and love of the Ahlul Bayt. But most people don't know this story. But I can tell you really and truly that in all my years of doing this research and working on Bibi Zainab and working on the shrine of Sayyida Zainab, which I would like to talk about a little, that she is truly a woman who has human and universal appeal, if we are able to present it as such. So rather than to just share fazail and anecdotes about Bibi Zainab's life, which you all know, right, and we hear in our majlis and in milads, I want to tell you the story of a few people who I have come across in my life who have learned about Bibi Zainab and really embraced her message and what she means for women. So I have a colleague, an American Civil War historian, a Jewish woman named Anne, who is a historian and very close to me. And she often tells people that I don't know much about Islam, but I do love Bibi Zainab, or Sayyida Zainab. Right? And I think that in this moment, right, where we see the fractures in our society, how moving it is to have people of all backgrounds say that Bibi Zainab, Sayyida Zainab, is a woman worth knowing, a woman worth loving. My research assistant for the past many, many years is a Palestinian PhD student. And obviously many of you will know that it has been excruciating for the last few years to watch what so many have had to endure. But being Palestinian means that the trials have not only recently started, and so my PhD student, her field work is actually interviewing Jordanian female refugees or Palestinian refugees who are in Jordan. And she tells me that oftentimes when she is interviewing these women and she is hearing the stories of what they have had to endure in their lives and the things and the losses that they have witnessed, she remembers and she thinks about Sayyida Zainab. And this student is somebody who knew nothing about Bibi Zainab before we started working together. But now when she thinks about what women endure and what women have been able to endure, she thinks about it through the lesson of Sayyida Zainab. And the last student that I think about that I would like to share, and I think it ties into what we are talking about today, I had a Syrian student in a class that I taught, Women, Gender, Islam, and it was in fall of 2024, so I can't forget that date for a very particular reason. And the student, Aya, is a Syrian Sunni, right? So she's a young 19-year-old girl, and she told me in the course of this class that she was so fascinated by the story of Zainab bint Ali that she went home and she asked her mother about this, because her mother is Syrian. And she said, there is this grave in Damascus to the granddaughter of the Prophet. Can you tell me more about it? Because I didn't really know anything about it. And Aya's mother told her that they had all, growing up, visited the shrine of Bibi Zainab. Right? And they had tremendous respect for it. And her mother had all of these fond family memories of growing up in Syria and visiting the shrine. And of course, these are Syrian Sunnis. And then I got to see that same student at the end of the semester in December 2024 tell me that when the Assad regime fell, that her father was crying and telling her that they could finally go home and that he would finally be able to take his children to visit his home. And I will say, as a professor of this young 19-year-old student, I do want a future where Aya gets to go to the land of her father, and she gets to visit the shrine of Bibi Zainab with her mother, like her mother did. And I think that that is a vision and a future that is reflected in what we are hoping to build today. And I think Dr. Azmat Hussain will be talking a little bit more about that. You all know, and you have all grown up, hopefully, with lessons of what makes Sayyida Zainab herself extraordinary, right? Her extraordinary family, the extraordinary things that she did in her life and the trials that she endured and triumphed over. But I think all the things that make her extraordinary also translate to her shrine. And I think that is why so many of us feel this sense of loss, that for many years it has felt like that shrine has been closed off to us. As more and more people have gone to Ziyara, to Iraq, and experienced that powerful connection, we felt a sense of loss, right? That we haven't been able to do that in Syria. But the shrine, I think, is so extraordinary because it's really one of the few shrines to a woman, a female in Islam. And if you look around the world and you really think about the shrines that you can name to a woman in Islam, there's very few, right? And this is one of the very, very few. And it is not just any woman, it is the granddaughter of our beloved Prophet, right? The Prophet who named Zainab, right? We all know the story that when she was born, Imam Ali and Bibi Fatima waited 3 days for the Prophet to return, and he took her in his arms and then he named her, right? So we know what an extraordinary personality she is. And for all that we talk about Islam, and we know that Islam is a religion that honors women and uplifts women, right? It is all the more important for us that this shrine to an extraordinary woman is one that is protected and preserved, and that we have the ability, along with many, many other people, to actually visit, right? And pay our respects there. But I think what has interested me as a historian, right, and I just want to give a little example of why the shrine is also so unique, and then we have this extraordinary ability to hear from the caretaker of the shrine today, is that it is really very quite different than many of the shrines that we're familiar with. So the Iraqi shrines in particular, many of us have visited. I'm actually curious how many people here have had the ability to visit Bibi Zainab's shrine for ziyarah. Okay. Not bad. And has it been, that's actually more than I would have thought, right? How many people have had the opportunity to go to Karbala? Okay, so it's obviously a lot more. You know, I think we have an image of the shrines like the ones in Iraq, right? And the shrines in Iraq have a very different institutional structure. So if you have been to the shrines in Iraq, you know they're called the Ataba, right? The religious institutions, the Ataba in Iraq, and they are affiliated with Najaf, and they are administered by the Shia Endowment Office of Iraq. But the grave and the shrine of Sayyida Zainab is very different. Right? And that's a little bit what I wanted to talk to you about today. So the Waqf endowment of Sayyida Zainab Shrine has been administered by one family, the Murtada family, for 8 centuries. And the shrine was bequeathed as a waqf. So it was given as a waqf in the year 1367, right? When Sayyid Mazen's great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather bequeathed it as a waqf, and his name was Sayyid Hussain ibn Musa al-Musavi, and they claimed their descent from Imam Musa al-Kadhim. And he donated all of his lands and orchards and all of the lands to serve this purpose. Right? So they gave the grave of Sayyida Zainab in a waqf, and he named all of his descendants as custodians. So that waqf, that caretaker role, has passed on in their family from generation to generation, from father to son, for 8 centuries. Right? And it continues till today. And that is not only extraordinarily, it's quite unique. Right? There is no other shrine in the Shia world that we visit that has that same structure. And this waqf can never be invalidated nor transferred to any other family, right, by the terms of this endowment. And when he signed that endowment over, when he created that waqf, there were multiple judges in Damascus who signed and witnessed that. And throughout the centuries, throughout the Ottomans and the French, and the drive for Syrian independence, and then the new state of Syria and all of these governments, it has passed on. And the Murtada family have administered the shrine from father to son, you know, through all the changing circumstances of the last 8 centuries. And they do it, and I think, you know, Sayyid Mazen will speak a little bit more about this, they do it through a sense of obligation both to Sayyida Zainab as this extraordinary woman in our faith, and also a commitment to their ancestors to continue this tradition. And, you know, what is also, I think, interesting, and you'll hear from Sayyid Mazen, is that they are not religious clerics, unless you have a secret, other backgrounds, or foreigners. They are of Damascus, and they are from the old city of Hayy al-Amin in Damascus, and they have been teachers and engineers and physicians and businessmen, and their story is embedded into the history of Damascus and the country of Syria. And so I hope you will get the chance actually to hear this from Mazen about how seriously they take their commitment to the shrine and how we can work with them to move this vision forward. But I actually wanted to tell a story about the Murtada family. So I came across this family in 2009. I was a student, I was at the American University of Beirut, and I decided that I was going to go to Syria and start working on Bibi Zainab's shrine. So I wanted to write a history of her shrine. And so I went across the border and I showed up in the offices of the Sayyida Zainab Shrine, and I said, who can I speak to about writing a history of this amazing shrine? And I ended up, luckily, meeting with Mazen's father, Dr. Hani Murtada. I think, and to his credit, if he was taken aback that this young woman who was an American, Canadian, Pakistani in Beirut just showed up and said, I want to write a history of the shrine, he didn't show it. He was more than happy to speak to the shrine. And he was genuinely happy and truly proud to share the story of his family and their commitment to Sayyida Zainab. And, you know, I think about that meeting in 2009. I don't think he could have ever imagined this scenario, that you would be here and we would be doing an event like this together. But what he told me then is what I want to tell you now, which is that I told him I don't want to write the history of the shrine for the last 20 or 30 years, right? The last 20 or 30 years of the shrine. I don't want to write that history because that has been a shrine and a period of time that has been driven by sectarianism and division, right? That is a story that we hear about the shrine. That is the narrative that has been told about the Sayyida Zainab shrine. And too many people think that that is the story of the shrine, but it is not, right? Because the last 20 or 30 years is just a moment, right, in the life of history. And we have too often let that brief period of time define the history of the shrine, right? And that's simply not the case. The shrine has been there through centuries and throughout the ages, just as the example of Zainab bint Ali has been there throughout the centuries and the ages. And so, in the years that I was working on the shrine, and I worked on the shrine, I realized so much about what makes Bibi Zainab's shrine unique is how it is a part of Syrian heritage. And I think, Syed Mazen can speak to that in more detail. But the other aspect of the shrine that I hope that we all, take time to realize is that it is this incredible historical site, right? And I found photos and stories and images and names of people in the archives of Bibi Zainab's shrine that I would have never known about. So one prong of this project that Dr. Azmat Hussain is going to talk to you a little bit more about is to revitalize the Sayyida Zainab shrine and the district. And one of the projects that we are going to be working on is helping to preserve and digitize some of the resources around the shrine, right? The information, the manuscripts, the documents, and building connections with educational institutions. And Dr. Azmat will talk a little bit more about that and what the vision for our project in restoring and revitalizing Sayyida Zainab's shrine looks like. But I want to leave you with, I suppose, an anecdote to wrap up what I think Sayyida Zainab has come to mean to so many people in so many places. So obviously we know that from 2011 onwards, it has been increasingly difficult to visit the shrine and do research on the shrine. And I was fortunate to go a few times in that period, but it was less frequent than what I wanted to. So I started traveling to Iraq quite frequently and trying to think if there were ways in which I could finish this book by traveling there. And I was invited by the Shrine of Imam Hussein to a conference in 2018. And it was a conference, it was a topic that I didn't think that I was interested in. But it was a conference for political prisoners, people who were former political prisoners of the Ba'ath regime of Saddam Hussein. And I stepped into this hall, filled with rows of hundreds of people who were telling the stories of what it was like to be imprisoned under Saddam and the extraordinary torture that they endured in those years. And I sat at the back of the room, which is where the two rows of women were, and I listened for hours, truly, as men got up and they shared the stories of their time in Abu Ghraib, the tortures that their family endured, the losses, and the grief. And then I started talking to a woman next to me, and she asked me what I was doing there, and I said, I'm working on a book of Sayyida Zainab, but it's been difficult to travel to Syria. And she said to me, well, you should write about us because we are all like Zainab here. And I only realized in that moment that these women who were sitting at the back of the hall, silent and not spoken of and not being given the chance to speak, were also women who were political prisoners. And they were women who sometimes spent 5, 10 years in Saddam's most cruel prisons, right? Many of them went years without seeing the sun. They were taken from their families and endured, stories that I think will stay with me forever. I see their faces, I remember their names. But what they have all told me in the 7 years that I've been speaking to these women, I've been gathering their stories almost to a T. Every one of them has told me that in their darkest moments in prison and in all the years after where they were forced to endure so much, the woman and the story that got them through that was Zainab bint Ali. Because they remembered that she too was a prisoner. And she too was put in chains, and she too was forced to endure the loss of her family and grief that we can't ever possibly imagine. And so they often told me if that she could endure what she did, then we can survive what we have to. And, you know, the way in which these women found so much profound solace in the story of Bibi Zainab will stay with me forever. But I have to be very honest, you know, I have seen these stories, you know, for many years of political prisoners, and it's very difficult for me to not look at the stories of what happened in Syria and not see a similar thing. And so when the regime fell and we heard stories of prisoners being released from Saydnaya, or the most horrific prisons, right, and the dungeons of the previous regime, I think it made me realize that as a human, it's not possible for me to hear these stories of these women in Iraq and not see the similar stories in Syria, right? And not understand that understanding the humanity requires us to understand the humanity of all. And I think that, you know, that we were told, I think, by Sayyida Zainab herself, that tyrants will rise of every sect, but also tyrants will fall of every sect, right? We know that, and sometimes we won't see it in our lifetime, but sometimes we do, right? And what we do in the aftermath of violence and destruction is the test of our faith. And I don't know if you all remember this famous line from Bibi Zainab's khutbah. She says to Yazid when she's facing him, she says, "You might think, right, that you have been given this time, but this respite that you have been given is but God's way of letting the tyrants grow in arrogance, and that their downfall may be complete," right? So we also know that she has promised us that the downfall of tyrants will come. And in the depths of tragedy, Sayyida Zainab said that famous line, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamila," right? I saw nothing but beauty, or I saw nothing but the beauty of Allah. And it is not just, I think, the ultimate sign of submission to God's will, right? To imagine in that moment that when she was asked, what do you think when you see the head of your brother on a spike, when you have lost everyone in your family, she says, I have seen nothing but beauty. It is not just the most ultimate sign of tawakkul of Allah, but it is also, I think, a message to us that we can see beyond the present, and we can see beyond the challenges of the present to hope for a future that could be. Right? That is, I think, in that moment what Bibi Zainab saw, right? She saw that in that moment she might be in chains, but then centuries later there would be people who remember her name in every corner of the globe, right? And she saw that, and I think that is a reminder for all of us to see beyond the present tragedies and to believe that we can make a different future. And so part of what we ask for you tonight, and you know, I'm so glad that we have this opportunity here to hear from Syed Mazen and also Dr. Azmat Hussain, is to share with you our goals for Bibi Zainab and the Sayyida Zainab Shrine, and to ask you, how do we build a future that is different from the recent past and the present that we experience, right? How do we build a different future? And I think one of the beauties of being a historian is that we know that what is doesn't always have to be, right? And that we can play a role in shaping that future. And so that is why we are so honored to have actually both of our brothers here tonight, both of our Syrian brothers, Wael Al-Zayat and Sayyid Mazen Murtada here, who have come to us, I think, from different paths, but they are sitting next to each other at this table, and I think are going to be so key to us in establishing a future, I think, that is better than the past that we've experienced for the last couple of decades. And I ask you to keep the spirit of Bibi Zainab's words in mind when you hear from them, "Ma ra'aytu illa jamila," I saw nothing but beauty. So I would now like to ask Sayyid Mazen Murtada. I've spoken of the Murtada family, and I have told you about their long, incredible history of the shrine, of their devotion to the shrine of Bibi Zainab for the last 8 centuries. So now we have an opportunity to hear from him. Coming from this long family history of being caretakers of the maqam of Sayyida Zainab, Mazen, of course, is following in the footsteps of his father and his grandfathers and all of them before that who dedicated their life and to protect and serve the Sayyida Zainab Shrine. And Mazen himself has lived most of his life in Syria, although we have realized in the past couple of days how well connected he is with the North American Shia community. He has an engineering degree from Canada, a master's in investment and finance, and he has also a private business in Syria. It is one of the leading construction companies in Syria. So he was previously in banking and finance, so he brings such a unique perspective to share with us today. And we're so fortunate to have him. And I just want to say, because we are so fortunate to have him and because we understand the sensitivities of the moment, we're going to stop the live stream at this moment. And we're going to ask you all to please not record anything. And we're just going to hear some words from Sayyid Mazen Murtada. So please.